Hey everyone, welcome back to It Had to Be Said Theater. This is the part of the channel where I discuss movies and TV series. Sometimes I talk about the valuable lessons the medium is trying to teach us, like Squid Game putting the violence of the capitalist system right in front of our eyes, or how Full Metal Jacket strips away the propaganda and shows us what the state really is. Other times, I talk about what we can learn from the weaknesses in popular media. This is one of those videos. If you follow me on the right-wing cesspool Elon has turned Twitter into, you'll know my username is anti-school teacher. So why am I an anti-school teacher? Because as a teacher, I care about education, and school is the worst possible way of educating people. If you want a longer answer, and I can see you do, check out this playlist. But if you'd prefer to watch this one before or instead of watching that series, great, but you might not always know where I'm coming from.
In case you haven't seen it, Lean On Me is about a teacher named Joe Clark, played by voiceover daddy. He gets fired from his original job teaching high school because he's sick of being pushed around, and then comes back years later when it's time to push people around. Joe becomes the dictator of the school. His word is law.
My word is law. There's only one boss in this place.
See that tall guy behind him? That's the head of Joe's security detail. Joe has his own private police force. As you can guess, Joe saves the school. Everyone is saying no to drugs and violence, and they're disciplined and passing their classes because of one guy. Everyone goes on to be doctors and scientists and shit.
As you might be able to tell, I consider all this unrealistic. I don't think anything Joe does would lead to those outcomes. They're just taken for granted. Besides, even this shiny, happy outcome is nothing compared to what people could do if they just stopped following the propaganda advice. So what do I mean by propaganda advice? Well, most of our most important beliefs come from propaganda. We believe school is the correct way to get an education. We believe students should be trying to pass tests and get jobs because that's what life is about. We believe tests prove you've learned and will remember. We believe kids can't figure out what they want or how to get it, or at least they have no judgment, so adults have to do all that for them. And where do we get these beliefs? Well, among other places, school. Our advice naturally comes from those beliefs. Stay in school. In fact, plan out your whole career while you're still in high school. Say no to drugs, because obviously all illegal drugs are equally bad. Your parents and teachers know what's best for you. So do whatever they say all the time without question.
Right from the opening scene of this movie, we're learning propaganda.
The cancer of racism imbues our national character.
He calls racism a cancer and a stain, as if racism just appeared one day by accident, as if it were something you could just wipe away but keep the institutions of the country intact. Joe, racism is the national character. It's not the stain, it's the fabric. Another opportunity for propaganda comes later in the movie when Joe's justifying his policies to the parents of his students and starts attacking his audience.
Sit down with your kids and make them study at night.
Sit down with your kids. You know, unless you have to work. These are working people, after all.
Go get your families off welfare.
Yeah, just get your family off welfare. Why, though? And how are you going to have a job and no welfare and still have the time to spend all evenings with your family? Have you ever been poor before?
Give our children some pride.
Give our children some pride, eh? I guess that's because jobs equals pride in a market society, whereas welfare equals shame. And this is not the only scene where collecting welfare is associated with shame.
This movie is clearly conservative fantasy. get jobs, get off welfare, because that matters, and spend all evening with your kids. Simple, right? Then your kids read and pass tests, and they get to have the American dream. In the same meeting, Joe says he wants the school to be a place
where the minds of the young are set free.
But that's not what school does. It does not free anyone's mind. It enslaves them to the dominant ideology they're being instructed on. In our case, a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal empire. The highest aspiration of this school is that it can turn out more grateful workers and consumers and fewer people who get sold to the prison system. He's talking about learning, reading, and math as if that really raises anyone up to new levels of greatness outside movies like this.
Where the minds of the young are set free.
He sounds like all preachers and politicians. And as if to underline that fact, Joe justifies everything because God said so.
I felt breakers crashing, swamping my soul.
We are not in church, Mr. Clark.
I fell down on my knees and I cried, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
So he's using the same justification authoritarians have for thousands of years. I speak for God. God said I should do it. And in another way, this scene is emblematic of the whole movie. Joe arrives at a meeting where people are angry at him, gives a conservative speech with no real answers, and by the end his audience is mostly on his side. It's like the whole movie. We see people warming to Joe Clark over time, but we don't really know why. The things he does would not lead to the happy ending this movie promises. But it's a movie, so they do. Halfway through the movie, they've already made a jump rope song for him.
I felt East Side Pride. I felt Joe Clark. He's on time. Oh, okay. Oh, holy cow. I'm out of here.
They're trying to force this outcome where Joe Clark is beloved by all students at Eastside High by the end of the year, and it just doesn't work. It's not organic. It just happens over time. Things get better, people love the school now, and love the principal. Don't ask why. Joe Clark yells a lot and turns the school around. Joe joins the kids jumping rope, and now they love him. Joe says God told him to be a dictator and wins over the parents. How does the input lead to the outcome? Magic screenwriting, I guess.
Joe's megaphone might be as iconic as anything else in this movie. It's actually the perfect representation of his need for his voice to be heard over everyone else's. His power depends on his voice being louder and more important, and his ability to silence dissenters. So he carries it around everywhere.
In fact, silencing dissenters is a common theme. Joe kicks people out, chains the doors, yells at people for disagreeing, suspends them for demanding respect, or just dismisses and ignores them. But the solution is not to shrink the number of decision makers, but expand it. The school would have done better with parents, students, and teachers working together to come up with solutions. I go into this more deeply in my playlist on education, but in brief, these students would benefit way more if they had more freedom in their education. The students should have more autonomy in what they study, more choices for more relevant topics of study. If the teachers aren't up to it, find ones who are. But then it would be about the students, and school has never been about the students. You can see it in this movie as clearly as any. The students are just tools of the institution, just like teachers. School has always treated kids like sheep. They have no choices. They have no freedom. They have no recourse. They move in herds according to the ringing of the bell. Why did they believe it was time for a dictator at Eastside High? Well, if you look at the first scene of Joe coming back to school, it's obvious.
Yet somehow, I don't buy it. No school could get this bad and still be a school. The 80s, when violence, drugs, and gangs were always represented in movies by Welcome to the Jungle. So you'd expect there to be fights, but here they're beating up a teacher for intervening in a fight with no consequences?
A lot of schools in the US have given up trying to change anything and just garrison some police. After all, if the only standard you're ever held to is whether or not a high enough percentage of students pass a test, that's the only thing you care about. Getting students to learn useful skills, to learn to work together, to find their own interests, set their own goals, and make their own decisions are not important.
There's even a literal backdoor drug deal. They're really trying to bash you over the head with social commentary. Like, yeah, it would be great if you could get guns and addictive drugs out of schools, but they're in like every high school in North America. So it's going to take a bit more than a change of principle. Oh, and Curtis Connor's here, too. How is anyone supposed to teach under those conditions? But Joe squarely blames the teachers for the students' poor grades.
Because you are failing to educate them. This is the posture that many of our students will wind up in.
But then he makes the logical leap from they get bad grades to you haven't prepared them for the world.
Facing a world for which you have not prepared them.
And that means they'll probably get shot in the streets.
But learning the things you learn in high school doesn't prepare you for the world anyway. In fact, nothing does. After leaving school, you just kind of learn as you go along, or you get somebody else to do the thing for you. Sure, they should be able to read and do arithmetic. Beyond that, we don't know what they'll need. Yes, they haven't taught the students useful skills for the future, and that's because it's a school. Students should have the freedom to decide what they want to learn, how, toward what goals, from which teachers, and with which classmates. But the only thing anyone knows is propaganda advice. To stay in school and get good grades for 16 years, then get a job. All problems solved. Poverty solved. Drugs left untouched. Murder avoided. The stain of racism washed away. And education, well, good enough to get a low-paying job anyway. And that was always the only goal, right? Does Joe even really believe in education? He shows us near the beginning he thinks education is a privilege only accessible to those who behave to his standards.
These people are incorrigible. And since none of them could graduate anyway, you are all expurgated.
A teacher saying students are incorrigible is not a good look. Just giving up on people when they're still teenagers is going to push them into what you already expect of them, like drugs and gangs. What Joe means is these young people don't fit his vision of a school completely under his control.
One of the students that got kicked out comes back and beats up the Curtis Connor lookalike. As a result, Joe locks all the doors.
I want every door in this school chained and locked. All of them.
Yes, sir.
This scene really reveals Joe's priorities. He doesn't even say, take Curtis to the hospital, as if wounds can wait, but the chains and locks, that's urgent.
So if there's a fire or a shooting, they can all just die.
It's tragic to think it's either go to school and live under this dictatorship or end up on the street. That's a threat that Joe acted on when he kicked those students out. In fact, it's a threat all teachers can invoke to scare their students. Stay in school or you'll end up on the street.
An angry mob of parents forms in response to those kids getting kicked out, and it's led by Lynn Thigpen, who says,
Some of those children are smart.
that line reveals the biases of the writer. Some of them are smart. They're all smart in the sense of having the potential to do all kinds of great things. They obviously did not respond well to school, like millions of their peers. So how about we accommodate them, instead of forcing them back into the sardine tin? When Joe responds, he says,
They say one bad apple spoils a bunch. Well, what about 300?
he uses the bad apples metaphor, and I see where he's coming from. If you have a class full of tame students and introduce one troublemaker, the whole class could go off the rails. Teachers try to break the student with punishment, and it usually works eventually. But none of this would be necessary if discipline weren't at the core of what school teaches. None of this would be necessary if you actually did what was right for students and their learning, because you wouldn't need all students to listen, be quiet, and stay still all the time if they were pursuing their own learning goals, or even just pursuing yours at their own pace. But that's not how school works. You have one learning goal: learn whatever the test requires. Then you can forget it.
This student clearly wants to come back after he got purged. Why is the principal so reluctant to let willing students back in? If a student shows he really wants to attend, why would you stop him? Why would you be so harsh? Is this the military where you have to weed out anyone not up to it? Are only those without sin acceptable students? A couple of minutes later, Joe's shaming this kid he's supposedly forgiven in front of the whole school. He's talking about self-respect, but he's squeezing every bit of it out of this child.
Self-respect permeates every aspect of your lives. If you don't have it for yourselves, you're not going to get it from anywhere.
If you don't have respect for yourself, you don't deserve it? And it's okay for an authority figure to humiliate you in front of the school? Like most adults, Joe's head is full of pointless adult rules and maxims, and because he's older and arrogant, he thinks they're all correct and should be imposed on 1,000 teenagers.
As if I needed another example, Joe gives 3 boys 3 days detention each with the threat of suspension for not belting out the school song.
You will sing the school song upon demand, or you will suffer dire consequences.
Dire consequences? Are there any safer schools they could transfer to? Schools where they aren't getting terrorized by the principal every day? How are they supposed to learn and concentrate with Joe Clark breathing down their necks? How many students develop anxiety thanks to this guy? He fires and suspends subordinates for demanding respect. It's weird to think how often the topic of respect comes up in this movie, and yet how little of it the protagonist has for anyone. If it were clear that he was in the wrong and he learned and changed by the end of the movie, the message would be, that's the wrong way to do things. But he doesn't change. He's validated. Everyone just warms up to him for their own reasons. So what's the message? Respect people and yourself unless you're in charge? People in charge don't need to show respect. They're much too important. Along with the pro-dictatorship theme, you could identify other beliefs the writer of this movie was operating under. There's the widespread belief in the dichotomy of smart people and not smart people. Remember?
Some of those children are smart.
Not all of them, though, apparently. They don't all have potential. Goodness, no. But they all have to go to school, whether they respond to it or not. That's the only place anyone can learn anything, as we all know.
Then there's the belief that grades and exams reflect that intelligence. The MacGuffin of this movie is the final exam that everyone has to take. On the day of the exam, Joe walks into a completely silent school assembly. Have you ever seen such a thing? To give a speech about the exam. He tries to give the school a pep talk, but he ends up reinforcing the idea that passing this test makes you smart, and by extension, not passing the test means you're still not as good as the rest of the world.
Students form opinions about themselves based on what we tell them. If we say passing a test is smart and they don't pass, we're telling them they're not smart. What does that mean to a student? They can't do it. They have no potential. They're worthless. They should not expect good things. They should expect a life of hard drudgery or even prison because they did not sufficiently meet someone else's standards as teenagers.
Then they start singing Lean on Me for no apparent reason. They could be doing last-minute revision, but hey, let's do some karaoke.
Anyway, back to intelligence. Here's another revealing line.
Kanisha has a gift. She has that spark, and we have to look after her.
Kanisha has a gift, so we want to nurture her, not like the other losers at the school who will amount to nothing. I have debunked the idea of smart and not smart people in 2 other videos, and if you're interested, you could click here. But to sum it up, we're all potentially good at stuff. All students have that spark if you don't snuff it out. They all have gifts, but school only recognizes a few skills as gifts. You know what would be a great gift to nurture? Organizing. Mutual aid. Mutual aid is the gift that keeps on giving. But of course, Joe doesn't know anything that requires horizontal organizing, only how to be in charge. Take this scene.
If we helped you find a job, a better place to live, would that help?
I like that they're intervening and getting to know students' families as well as the students. Only problem is, this is the individual approach to changing people's circumstances. I'm guessing all the students and their parents could benefit if you could get them better jobs and living conditions and so on. But then you'd still be changing things one person at a time, instead of examining the political, economic, academic system and why it has impoverished so many people. Their intervention could have been the beginning of a mutual aid system, of all the students and their families sharing their resources and skills to make sure everyone had enough. No one needed to get jobs or go on welfare or do drugs, because their basic needs were assured because they were part of a community. Instead, welfare is bad and jobs are good. Don't worry about community. Don't try to create a self-sustaining system of people working for themselves. Just get a job.
Near the end of the movie, Joe Clark goes to prison for violating the fire code, and hundreds of his students get together to try to free him. Nice, right? Good for them. Work together for a cause you believe in. Freeing people from prison is a really noble cause.
So why did they only try to free Joe Clark? Hundreds of students could have turned into thousands if they had got some from other schools. Maybe they could have freed their friends and relatives in prison too. Maybe they could have started a campaign, a movement to free more prisoners, to decriminalize drugs and sex work, to provide care for those affected by drugs or gangs or prison or abuse, and so on. That's mutual aid. But instead, we'll get Mr. Clark out and then just go back to school and forget about social problems. You can be sure Joe would want it that way.
What happened? What'd you do?
I chained the doors. Now you break the law, you pay the price.
Like most authoritarians and their bootlickers, he's saying you should follow and be punished by the law. This would have been a good time for the students to beat up the cops and de-arrest the guy they like, and then riot. But that would be against the rules.
Now you talk about the law, but you're twisting the law. The laws are made to protect the people, and that's what he's doing for us.
I'm sorry? The laws are made to protect the people? And that's what Mr. Clark is doing? Okay, confused conservative screenwriter. By the way, this student talking, Joe said one thing to her, that she should be a lawyer, and now she's an expert in the law. It's like everything in this movie. Tiny input of a suggestion somehow becomes the huge outcome of someone who now has a whole career planned and loves Mr. Clark.
If I've taught you anything, I have tried to give you respect for the law.
What? Why? No one respects the law. You don't even have enough respect to keep your students safe from fire. I mean, I'll be the first to say most laws are there to benefit the ruling class, but having accessible fire exits is pretty important for everyone's safety.
Sorry to spoil the ending in case you really didn't see it coming, but they passed. Enough students got good enough marks on the one exam. The one achievement anyone cared about. This movie's MacGuffin has been found and placed in a museum. And the students all became doctors.
I guess the messages of this movie are, let a benign dictator solve your problems for you. Learning takes place in school only. Respect for others is conditional. And social problems are mostly your fault. Not one of my favorite movies.